Good morning, Cindy.
Good morning, Dennis.
We are here to talk about the holidays, and we promised our listeners a few months ago when we last visited with you that we were going to talk about the dynamics of holidays. And there's so many great things, there's so many not so great things, and things that we just have to deal with at times. And I had my own great experience. I went to New Mexico to see my mother-in-law with my wife and daughter. Travel was okay. The meal was great. Not a lot of stress, so it worked out really well. But you can just never tell what's going to happen, especially if you come from a large family. I know you and we have only children, so it's not a huge family dynamic. But when you start adding relatives to a meal or a visit, it starts to get a little complicated.
Yes,
but there's also some great things too. So I want to just use experience. We're going to talk about all different facets of families, of children, of parents, of people that are maybe single during the holidays, large families. I want to cover it all because, our listeners, they come from so many varied and diverse backgrounds. But let's talk about the holidays in general. And I know that, when you talk to people, whether it's a husband and wife or a family or single people or somebody that has a partner, there appears to be, and I'll use my experiences, a lot of pressure with the holidays, especially if you're hosting. If your parents are going to come visit, if your siblings are going to come visit, it adds that extra pressure. So maybe talk about the dynamic, because it appears to me that when we get all back together, everybody reverts to themselves a long time ago. And I want you to explain that to me, please, because anytime I'm talking to my mom, it's like I'm 14 again. And I imagine that my child also gets that from me, who's 20 now, that she reverts to a 10, 11-year-old on how I think she talks, how she thinks I talk to her. But I like to treat her as an adult. So maybe talk about that dynamic first as we all get together for the holidays.
Well, our first and most immediate experience with our children when they're children, and with our parents when we're children, is as children. And so that is the longest period of time that they knew us intimately and that we know our children intimately. So it's an easy, comfortable shoe with not much arch support to fall into, if you know what I mean.
I do.
What I mean by that is that it's familiar, and it's what we know of these people. It's what our original relationship was based on. When we were home, we were children. And when our children were home, they were children. And so these different people, you and I as adults, these different people, your daughter, my daughter, as young adults, emerging adults that are growing and changing, we don't kind of know that person so well. We know that old person. And so it's an easy voice and cadence to get into on both sides because it's what we know. And so we have to kind of protect against that, because it doesn't give everybody a chance to feel respected and honored for who they are and where they are in life now, and to feel empowered. And for young adults, as an example, when they come home, I think they're hoping to feel lifted and supported and validated, that they're seen as the young adults that they are. And they so much want that appreciation and, oh my goodness, you're doing so well, that kind of feeling.
Well, I'm glad you into that dynamic, and they also don't want to be peppered by questions either. So make a note of that, parents. So
absolutely.
So if we could just stick with the parents, if there's a child coming back, whether you have one child or several children and the siblings coming back for the holidays, what are some of the pitfalls that parents should be wary of and be careful about?
I think that when we were parents of younger children, we were in charge of them. That's the first port of call to be attentive to. They're beginning to, as young adults, college-age students, and then into their 20s and 30s, if we're so lucky to have them come home, they are making some of their own decisions and some of their own mistakes. And our positions as parents need to change. They need to make these mistakes. They need to discover how they want to live, who they want to be. And it's only in making these mistakes that they can begin to make their own way in the world. So the first set of things we don't want to do is continue telling them what to do, or to impose our will on them, or express a lot of judgments about things that we observe that we might not like. That's not very helpful at that point in time. Having said that, when kids come home, they're neither fish nor fowl. They're sort of in between childhood and adulthood, kind of advanced adolescence, I would say, in the early years, like 19, 20, 21, when they're first coming home. Maybe they're coming home after college, or maybe they're living on their own, just working, but they're not quite all there, all together, all formed yet, but they're on their way. And they certainly want to be treated as adults, even though, and they believe that they're all together, even though we may see things in them that don't look that they're all together quite yet.
That's a really good point, because it is perspective, isn't it? I know that from my experience, when my daughter comes home from the holidays, she wants to just lay around and relax, be fed, and not worry about grocery shopping or cooking for herself, which we're happy to do, of course. Maybe do some laundry, visit some friends, do some really cool things. As I mentioned, not be peppered with a bunch of questions, maybe do a little venting. But I did want to ask you about one dynamic, and this is veering off a little bit from the families and the holidays, but it does come up periodically with my wife and I, that when our daughter was younger, like probably you with your child, you had a set of house rules, curfew, be home for dinner, get your homework done. So most of those rules don't apply, but the one thing that we're grappling with, my wife and I, is about still a curfew in our house, because parents, if you're a parent, you're never going to stop worrying about your child when they go out. It's just a fact of life, and that's the way it is, right? So with that said, when our daughter's going out, we wonder, and we've talked about this, should we set a curfew to them? And if we did, what time should that be? And if she goes past it, should we be angry about it, or should we just let her be this young adult? As you can hear from me, there's a lot of dynamics going into her being an adult, going out, and she thinks that she can stay out till as long as she wants. It's not a big deal because she's in college now, but she's under our roof for a couple, 2-3 weeks. That's an interesting dynamic in itself.
It is. And I think the way I think about it is that the new set of rules is not so much about control, but rather about safety and mutual respect. So even if you were living with a housemate, you probably wouldn't want to come in at all hours of the day or night. And if you want rapport with your housemate, and it would be nice if you did have a rapport with your housemate, then you would want to at least inform them, if you're not going to be home, so that they're not wondering and worrying about you, so that if they wake up in the morning and you're not there, they're concerned about your whereabouts. So if you're living with decent human beings, and certainly we think our parents are probably decent human beings, people who love you out of care and concern, you wouldn't want to just leave them dangling that way. You'd want to say, gee, I've opted to spend the night where I am. I'll be home in the morning, which is quite a different spot from when you're 17 and you're expected home by midnight, or else you're going to be grounded.
Right.
That's a very big jump I'm making here. So in this situation, I'm describing not wanting to wake up your elders at night, not wanting to unnecessarily worry them with not knowing, even if you're in the most basic way okay. And this is what I mean by safety and respect, because it's a measure of safety to be clear with the people you live with, whoever they may be, whether they're your parents or whether they're your friends or just a housemate, that you would want to have some kind of a rule of safety that, we tell each other where we go, not for the sake of snooping, but for the sake of safety. And also in that same vein, respect, because if we presume that because we live together, we do in the most basic way care about one another, then we wouldn't want to worry our housemate or our parent. So I'm beginning to talk about this parent role then, in this sense, Dennis, as a situation where when kids come home, we're kind of their housemates for a few weeks.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good way of putting it. And I think you just have to pump the brakes as a parent that your child's getting older and there's different levels of respect and boundaries and all those kind of things. And it's just hard. You can hear it in my voice, and you can hear how Dr. Cindy Post is explaining it. Parents, you've got to grow up too as your kid gets older, and it's just a different dynamic. I did want to talk about large families, and for anybody that's been on TikTok, there's a famous TikTok that goes around about, and it's a fun one, about the toxic traits of all my family when they get together. And it's usually somebody doesn't like to socialize, somebody sleeps all the time. It's a fun thing that they take a picture and a video of all their family members and their little funny toxic traits. With that said, when we get into a large family dynamic that all the kids are coming back from the holidays and you're hosting, the aunts and uncles are there, or the really super close friends, and it's a big dynamic. I think there's an excitement to that we're going to feed a lot of people. We got to get a lot of food and drinks, but also the dynamic that goes with all the different personalities that are getting together that maybe usually don't. And we got to look out for Uncle Fred and his politics. We got to look out for Aunt Mary and her viciousness. We got to look out for Billy Bob, and he talks your head off all the time. I could go on and on, but all these things come up. Talk about the large family dynamic and holidays and maybe the good stuff, but also the things we have to be worried about. And once again, the pressures of hosting when big, large families get together and what that is like.
It is at its best organized chaos.
Well said. Well said.
At its worst, just chaos.
Yeah.
And so what we want is a more organized, festive, joyous, boisterous, fun, laughing experience over the holidays where everybody gets to come together. It's a feeling of inclusiveness. All parties are welcome. There's an old poem by a guy named Rumi called The Guest House. And I think that says it well. The guest house is about feelings and letting all feelings in. Well, all feelings and all sorts of people, and that we may have a whole host of feelings and that we can let them be there, and that we might not love every feature of every person. But after all, we're family, and that we come together and we try to find points of connection and commonality, and we try to steer clear of the points that are challenging. If there are political differences, religious differences, attitudes about different issues that are going on in our world today that we know are problematic, we steer clear of them. In some cases, that may mean we're talking about the weather. But then again, the weather is a challenging topic too these days.
I want to stay with politics just for a second. We're not going to get political, but I want to talk about the family dynamic because as we are very clear about in today's society, over the last 5 to 7 years, that politics have broken up a lot of families with people that don't speak anymore, which is really super sad. And I think we'd like to get to a point where we can start to share those things again someday and not be as polarized. But if you have that sibling or that brother or sister or uncle or aunt or really good family friend that is definitely coming to the dinner and the Christmas holidays or Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever holiday you be celebrating, and you're going to break bread with them, and you know of their political affiliations and they might not be able to stop themselves, how do you handle those situations? Because as a host, when you get together, obviously there's some politeness, and maybe they're self-aware that we have different politics, but it's going to come up. You don't want a giant family fight. How do you avoid these kind of situations? Because I understand every situation's a little bit different, but just in general terms, how do you handle that?
I think that if things start to get a little bit tense, that somebody needs to go ahead and quietly call process, meaning, you know what, this isn't going well. Let's change the subject. Or if you can do it more subtly, all the better. Somebody made that wonderful cheesecake and somebody just says, oh my gosh, have you tried that cheesecake? That is the best. Hey, I want everybody to go around and have a piece of that.
It's funny you say that, and I don't know if your daughter does it, but my daughter is smart as a whip, and every time I try and pivot after we get into maybe a boundary issue or an argument, Dad's trying to change the subject. Look at it. She's trying to do it. There it is. I get busted every time. Maybe I'm not as brilliant as I think, Cindy.
Well, There are times that kids do that, and it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And then there are times, like in a larger group with people that are just so different from one another, that it really is best to just...
Delicious holiday meals are right around the corner when you shop Meijer. Get Meijer Spiral Sliced Half Ham for 89 cents per pound, limit 2. Meijer canned vegetables like green beans are just 39 cents. And Pillsbury refrigerated baked products are buy 2, get 1 free. Plus, whip up your favorite holiday desserts with low prices on family favorites like Meijer butter, flour, and sugar. Get more for your money with the same low Meijer prices no matter how you shop, in-store or online. Exclusions apply. See all the deals in the Meijer app.
Lighten the topic and move forward. And hopefully there's somebody in the group willing to do those things, because it really is needed to keep the family connections healthier. And it sounds funny what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is, let's not talk about it to keep things healthier. But in some cases, we just have to agree to disagree. Some situations, we're never going to have a constructive talk about these topics. Now, yes, Dennis, I agree. Aspirationally, would we like to think that one day we can at least have a chat about these things and begin to explore ways that people might understand one another's perspectives better? Hopefully so. But sometimes, especially right now, things seem to be pretty pitched up and tense in some of these areas. And so for the sake of families being able to stay connected, some topics are left unsaid.
Yeah, that is well said. I want to talk about another dynamic with you, and I'll use myself as an example again. I did not come from a large family, but my wife did. So we're traveling from one city to another, and it is all her family, all the extended family. I mean, it's close to maybe 60, 70 people. And I'm an outgoing person, but that's overwhelming for me, especially being strangers and showing off the husband, the new baby, all that kind of stuff, that pressure. But, I got warned about a few people. But in that dynamic, as you're traveling and going to somebody else's place and you don't feel comfortable, whether it's socially or, a lot of people's politics, or maybe they're not friendly or outgoing, or it's just weird. What about the advice you have for people that are traveling to a large function that maybe might not feel that comfortable, but for your spouse's sake, you got to get in there and get a little dirty?
So kind of what is the best way forward in that setting?
Yeah.
So, I think that's where your spouse can help you integrate in the conversation. That's where they can bring you in on conversations. They can be looking for things that they know you do connect with, so that when you're talking with people, you can be kind of guided toward the people you might connect with more, and to kind of help encourage people getting to know certain things about you and saying, that's something you really like to do too, isn't it? And be looking for those points of connection.
Well, Cindy, if I could interject for a second, though, and my wife didn't mean anything by this the first time we did this. I was on my own. There was no introduction. Here's Dennis, and then I was on my own. Sometimes I had the baby, sometimes I didn't. But sometimes people like me are left to their own devices. Luckily, I was a social, outgoing person. But it can be overwhelming if you're not from a large family and all of a sudden you're meeting 70 people that are grilling you about what you're like. Do you like this? What are your politics? Do you like this sports team? I mean, it can be really harsh in these kind of situations. And I was thinking that if I'm an introvert, my God, I'm going to get killed in this atmosphere. So I guess my point is that, also you can have any kind of dynamic for yourself, but going into that, it's like the lion's den.
Yeah, it can certainly feel that way.
Yeah.
And what I would say, as I say to people in general, this maybe would be another topic for us for another day, but, just socializing in general is hard.
Yeah.
And coming out of COVID, socializing is even harder. So these holidays coming up, I think people are feeling like they're having to dust off their social skills.
Yes.
And get back into it. And so what I often say to people is, if you feel like you're the outsider, kind of letting yourself listen to what is the conversation and where might I enter it? And also, who else seems like they're an outsider a little bit? Who can I go over and stand? Just park yourself next to them and strike up a conversation with them, because they look like they don't know anybody either. Or maybe they're feeling a little uncomfortable too. Look for the other uncomfortable people. And when all else fails, go in the kitchen and help out.
That is really good advice. The kitchen always is usually a safe haven. And I know that there always appears to be designated spots for men and women that gets a little bit silly, like all the dudes are in front of the TV watching the football game and the women are cleaning. That's really not necessarily the case in every family, but it is funny because the kitchen usually is a safe haven where you can just get busy. There's a little chatter going on, but it's a safe space. And Dr. Cindy is right about that. I did want to talk to you about single people, divorced people, maybe people that are by themselves during the holiday. Maybe they do have a place to go to, but they're not with that loved one anymore. And there's a sense of sadness, maybe remorse and guilt and all the horrible feelings that go with why ever you're by yourself at the time. And whether you're going back with your parents and you have your children with you, but there's not a spouse or partner anymore. That's holidays can be very difficult for people, Cindy, and I'm sure you've talked to people over the years, whether it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, any of the other holidays where families are supposed to get together and everybody's supposed to be joyful and happy. It might not be a nice time for them, but they're required to go back or they need to go back because they want to see their older parents. It could be 10 million different reasons, but that's an interesting dynamic that's got to be really tough during the holidays for a lot of people.
Yes, I think so. And I think being mindful of those individuals and really helping them feel included for the people that are there and are part of the group or have their own family unit is very important. Helping them just feel like they're part of it, not making them feel like they're an other, like they're an outsider, bringing them into the conversation, maybe, talking with them ahead of time about the event. These are all ways we can help them. And then things that I encourage the individual to do, like here's a simple one, come early.
Yeah.
Don't come late. Don't show up as the last person in the room because that won't feel comfortable. Look for things you can do, routines you can have in that setting to help yourself feel comfortable in a larger group setting as an individual. What are the routines you can engage in? Who are the safe people that you can begin to foster connections with? Another thing I encourage individuals to do in anticipation of the holidays, I might call the host ahead and talk to her about who's going to be there, or talk to him, who's going to be there, anybody you would want to direct me to, anybody you'd like to tell me about, and also, are there people that you could even meet with in that setting that are going to be in that setting before the holidays? So you're not just coming to it just flat, not having had any contact with anyone. I think that's the hardest one. When you've been really isolated from this group and then you're going in fresh to a new group and you don't really have much of a connection here. And then you're going into a larger group. So if you've had some contact in one way or another, and I wouldn't wait till just the holidays, like we're coming up on a holiday now, but you know what? We still have a few weeks.
Yeah.
And for those individuals who are alone, hey, find a couple people that are going to be in that setting. See if you can meet them for a coffee or a drink or do something. And also, maybe you come up with a fun game to play with everybody at the holiday gathering. Maybe you say while you're there, hey, do you guys want to play charades? Or be looking to do something so you can be sort of in the group and not feel like an outsider.
I like that. That's really good advice. I did want to circle back to something about reverting to our old selves, but I wanted to just expand just a little bit more on that and ask you the question, when all family gets together, and I'm talking all family, they seem to revert to being blunt, no boundaries, and just really almost bizarre behavior than they probably would out in public or the workplace when they get back with family, whether they're really braggy or, my life is great and they don't understand the political boundaries that they're crossing over. When we get together as human beings in those situations, why do we cross all those lines that we normally probably wouldn't with everybody else on the planet? Why, when we get together as family and loved ones, why do we do that?
I think that people are looking for validation and they're deeply, and that's the same kind of association with why people regress, because you're talking about why people regress into some of their old familiar behaviors. I think that the bragging is an insecurity and a wish for validation. I think that we go back to what is familiar to us, even if what is familiar isn't that great a behavior, when we feel uneasy. when we feel like we're not grounded, we look for what's familiar, even though sometimes what's familiar isn't our best self.
Yeah, yeah. So
Right.
in that situation, if you're the receiver of that kind of behavior, what's the appropriate way to handle it during the holidays? Because you don't want to blow somebody off and say, yeah, whatever. And, you want to nod your head and maybe engage a little bit, but you also want to be appropriate but not blow somebody off. But maybe you could expound a little bit about how do you handle those situations if people are like that when they're constantly pushing boundaries on you during the holidays?
I think to say something either again directly or indirectly, because we're talking about managing our own boundaries. So it might be something as simple as subtly changing the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That's one level. Another level of boundary setting might be to say something along the lines of, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Could you explain? So you hand it back to them when something's not feeling comfortable. That may or may not always be the right thing to do because you may not want them to explain.
Right.
It may be a matter of setting a more sturdy boundary and saying, it's okay with you. I'd rather move on to another topic. So you might just change the topic. You might say more directly, let's change the topic. You might inquire what's making them ask or what do they mean by what they're saying, or I'm confused isn't a bad one right there. Sometimes that's enough for people to kind of be put back in their place, that there's something about what's happening that's not working well.
So if Dr. Cindy Post and I were talking right now and I wasn't happy with the conversation, I go, hey, Dr. Cindy, how about those Commanders? They're playing pretty well.
That would be one way. That would be one way.
That certainly would. And I always revert to sports when I don't like a conversation. But I think that's really good advice to try to be as polite as possible, but move on to something else. We only have about less than 4 minutes left, Dr. Cindy, and I did want to just kind of wrap up everything, put a bow on it. So, the holidays are coming up once again. We've already been through one, and maybe it was stressful for a lot of people, and now we got to do it all over again, and it might be even more intensified. So maybe let's just go through a couple things that we should recap that you should look out for no matter who you are and whether you're hosting or you're traveling. There just seems to be a lot of stress, and you made a really good point that I think people should think about is that, and I've noticed in everybody's behavior. I mean, just go on social media for Pete's sake, that everybody, I think, has to relearn their social skills and how to interact with everybody, whether it's singularly or small groups or large groups. With that said, maybe let's go over just a few things that you think about as you talk to all your patients and your family dynamic and things that you know about what we should try and work on, what we should look out, and maybe might happen during the holidays that good or bad, or something that this might be, pushing those boundaries again. Let's kind of wrap everything up on what we should look for.
People are themselves, whether it's a holiday or not. Mm. So don't have expectations of, now I'm going to date myself here, Dennis, by talking about Norman Rockwell by the hearth singing songs. But, the idea that people are supposed to be joyous and happy singing around the piano or something like that, that if your relationships are difficult, then you'll find some difficulty during the holidays, and it might feel amplified and a bit more painful. So that said, it's important to manage yourself well. So thinking about how do you want to manage your holiday experience so that you can have a good holiday? How much time do you want to spend? Do you want to take your own car? How do you want to communicate in advance about the holiday? How do you want to prepare both literally and emotionally for it in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, making some advanced plans with smaller groups if you're by yourself, thinking about some of those individuals that you can find challenging and thinking about how you want to engage with them so you're not surprised by something that really isn't a surprise. If you know these people, you know what their tendencies are. So don't let yourself get surprised or hurt by this. The other final two comments I'll make are these, Dennis. One, be impeccable with your words. Assume that you're wearing a wire. Whatever you say afterwards, downloading or venting, it can circle back and that can hurt you and others. So that's a really important one to remember always. Then the other thing I would say is really try to have realistic expectations and communicate and plan really well as you move towards this holiday.
I think that's really sound advice, Dr. Cindy Post. And I can't thank you enough for your time, because I know a lot of people are thinking about this, especially coming off of Thanksgiving and now going into the second set of holidays. There's a lot of stress out there, not to mention the travel that's going to be wacky, and whether you're hosting or traveling or you're by yourself or you're with people. It's just hopefully it's a really nice time for everybody, as now we've gotten out of COVID and we're trying to integrate ourselves back into whatever our new normal is. So thank you so much for your time, and early happy holidays to you and your family. And
you as well.
And thank you. And we'll be talking in the new year a lot. But Dr. Cindy Post, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dennis. And if people want to reach out to me, CynthiaPostPhD.com.